Welcome to Financial Insider Weekly. I am your host, Michael Gray, CPA. My guest today is Judy Barber. Judy is a consultant and mediator who assists clients in resolving the overlap between family and money matters so families are better equipped to make sound financial, succession, philanthropic, and estate planning decisions. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist, and in her work with families who share an operating business or co-ownership interests, Judy provides a process that identifies how the overlap between family and the enterprise impacts on current and future planning. She also defines objectives or helps the client to define objectives and works through the obstacles to create and implement an action plan that strengthens family bonds as well as meet the best interests of the enterprise. Ms. Barber is a founding member of the American Bar Association Committee on Psychological and Emotional Issues of Estate and Financial Planning. And I'll add, Judy just has a great reputation here in the community, working together with a lot of the attorneys and so forth. We have a lot of common friends, many of whom you've seen on this show. And so I'm really delighted to have Judy as a guest today. And so Judy, welcome.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Okay, great. Now today we're going to be talking about the thorny issues dealing with family money as it passes from one generation to the next. How do you pass money down to the next generation without disabling your children? So this is a big issue. Again, are you going to be taking away people's motivation to work and so forth? So why are some families more successful at that process than others? That's what we're going to be talking about today. Judy is not a lawyer, so we're not sitting here talking about legal issues. That's one of the reasons why I think this is going to be an interesting interview for you. Judy, again, is a therapist, and so really she's helping people to work through many of the emotional issues that relate to money. And so I thought she would be a great guest for our show today. Okay, well, let's get started with some of our questions. Judy, in anticipation of transfers of wealth, how and when did you begin to teach your children about managing money?
So I began myself, and what I suggest for clients is that the earlier the better. Mm-hmm. And you know, certainly you're not going to hand a 5-year-old $10 a week and say, well, you know, spend this money the way you want. But it's really important to, first of all, pay attention to when your children are actually ready. They may be asking about money. And it's important to, from my perspective, it's important to make some decisions going forward for the children. This idea of how come some parents do better than others. I think the people who really think through what it is that they feel like they need to do. So for example, parents may be ambivalent about allowances and do we do chores and do we pay for chores, do we not? And it's important to make a decision. From my perspective, chores are for children to do because they're part of a family. And that and giving a young person, even a young child, an allowance means that what's important is they actually are learning how to manage money. And so when you start young and you start in a simple way that connects to who your child is and your child's interests, and then by the time they go to high school, they may have, clothes allowance, they may have more things that they end up spending. And then by the time they go to college, they're actually prepared. So I know with my own daughter, when she went away to college, the first year it was every quarter, and then we went to 2 years. Each and a half year, and then by her junior year, she was really managing the money herself, and so and she actually asked for that. She said, "I think I can do it." And we said, well, how much money do you think you should have in your savings account? I promise I'll keep $3,000 in my, in my savings account. And she did a really good job. So part of it also is an interest, but just moving young people along so that It's not a situation where by the time they're in college, mom and dad just write them a check, because that's really close to going out in the real world and needing those skills.
Yeah. Well, what we did, between you and me, is we told the kids, you can't count on us to necessarily pay for everything, for your entire college education. We think that you need to go and work. And so all of our kids, now, one of my daughters got very spoiled because basically she worked for me.
She probably got paid well too.
Well, but she also happened to be an excellent worker, and so I got an excellent employee, and she's still, by the way, now she's working with me today, and she manages my websites and so forth.
It's interesting because my daughter decided from her sophomore year that she wanted to work because she didn't want to spend all the money that had been set aside for her college account. So she worked her way through school too, in terms of not using less money.
You want to hear the extreme for that, because we do want to move on, but because we can tell different stories about different things all the way along. But again, when my second daughter got married, my wife said, okay, well, this is how much we're going to contribute to paying for your wedding. You guys decide how you want to spend it. And so my daughter planned a fairly small wedding. And then also, though, she was trying to figure out how she could have some money left over, basically, to pay for their honeymoon with the money that we had allotted. So she was definitely planning and thinking about
frugal about it. Yes.
Yeah. Well, why don't we just go ahead and move along, because, like I said, we could just
we could tell stories about our kids.
Yeah, well, just for hours. What are the unique issues that families of wealth face? So now we're talking about the very wealthy families again, or maybe not so wealthy, but still, I mean, you got mom and dad. They've worked hard. They've accumulated, or maybe they were lucky and they received some money for some reason as an inheritance. So what are the types of problems that these people face?
Well, I think that it's the balance of having independence and being connected. So most, I'll say middle class, whatever middle class is, young people, they go to college, and maybe their parents help them out, may even help them at graduate school. But then when it's over, it's over. They need to go get a job. With families of wealth, there's often a company, or there's ownership of, have investments, and they're going to meetings all the time, and they're, still connected to their cousins and their siblings. So how do they find that? How do they find that sense of independence? And I think sometimes what happens is that parents see that their children are graduating from college. Well, you can come stay in the cottage, until you get a job, and by the way, here's some allowance, and by the way, here's your big screen TV for your cottage, and and so but then they're upset because they're not motivated. And I worked with one family where the son and the daughter both, they were living in a little back house. We're just having a really great time, and seeing their buddies and going out, and finally the parents said, you know what? In 6 weeks, you need to be out. And of course, what that meant is that they had to get a job as well.
Yeah.
So, so that idea of, well, we can make things really comfortable, but is that really the best thing?
Yeah.
And so that idea of being independent and being able to say, well, this is really what I want to do with my life, but then there's the money in the background, and so can they actually really do that?
Yeah. So I go to meetings sometimes for people that are particularly, like entrepreneurial types, and they've worked so hard to establish themselves and so forth, but they talk about, how they're helping their kids, and I don't want my kids to have to go what I went through and so forth.
That's
and
right.
the irony is, though, that it's the things that they did go through that enabled them to accumulate what they have.
That's right. And often entrepreneurs have children who may be very motivated, but it's not to make money. It's to be an artist, or to be a social worker, or to do something in the nonprofit. And the most important thing is having meaning. We all have to have meaning in our lives, and money can provide meaning, but money isn't the meaning. And so it's tough.
Yeah. Okay, well, what are some of your thoughts about how to pass money down to the next generation?
So, again, coming back to this, what parents may have an easier job with their kids, and I think the really core thing is to think things through. That if you decide that you're going to provide a down payment or buy a house for your son or daughter, what does that really mean? And does that mean that you get to come in and help decide the color of the living room? Mm-hmm. And so, is it really a gift? And if it's a gift, are you letting go? Uh-huh. Or is it not? And if it's not, I think it can be detrimental, because what's important is for young people to go out and be independent and make their own way in whatever context of the money. And so when you think about beginning to provide money, you can have a son or daughter who says, I'm a little short this month, we bought a new TV, can we borrow some money? The borrowing never works, unless you sign a promissory note. And I certainly have seen young people who have said, I want to start this business, I want to pay you back. I can actually start paying you as soon as I start the business. I mean, there are different ways of doing it, but this idea of, well, you'll need to pay us back, that just creates a tension unless it's really done with a sense of a business approach. So I think that's one of the in a way, the money is a catalyst that can be positive. It can really be helpful, or it can be negative, or some combination of the two.
Yeah. Well, of course, some people, I mean, you've seen these things in your experience, and unfortunately, I've seen it in my experience. So for some people, parents, I should say, or maybe grandparents, money represents control. It's a way that they can control their children or grandchildren, because, well, all they have to do is, is the faucet on or off?
Right.
So there is that aspect.
And it's interesting, because I don't think that they're really conscious of it. It's just the experience is, well, if I, what is it do I get back if I give you this?
Yes.
But that's never spoken. I remember having a client whose mother said, I just really love to help you redo your kitchen. She said no. She said, well, what do you mean no? Well, I'm making money and I'm setting money aside. She said, why won't you let me do it? Because you'll want to design the kitchen. I don't want you to design the kitchen. I want to design my own kitchen. So, I mean, at least she was able, and so they came in and they talked about it and they sorted it out. But, but I have so much more experience. I've been doing interior decorating for ... numbers of years. I still want my kitchen the way I want it. So why don't you want to take my experience? Well, because I need my own experience.
Yeah, and this thing of establishing independence, there's the thing, eventually the bird has to be pushed out of the nest, in a sense, and the issue is going to be, when and how and what is going to be the context or whatever for the situation. In other words, you can let them be independent and you can still be there as an advisor during your lifetime, or else when you're gone, then it's done, and now that you're not going to be there to do that parenting role.
Well, you know what's interesting. So, in watching how people work, if parents decide they're going to give a chunk of money to their children, okay, and they say, okay, we're going to give you $100,000. Let's skip the tax issues, but they're going to give each of their kids $100,000, and they say, and we'd really like you to put $50,000, in an investment account. So the next step is, well, who's going to be the investment advisor? And in one family that I worked with, the parents said, no, what they basically said is that we want you to have the independence to make these decisions, but actually, and you have a choice. You can use our advisor or not. But we would like you to, if you don't want the advisor, that you talk to 2 or 3 people that he or she knows, because it would be really good for us if we knew who was managing the money, knew our advisor. So that's kind of a middle ground there, where they're not saying, oh, you have to use our advisor, but you want to have. But they wanted to have someone who was kind of in his circle.
I see. Sort of communicating anyway.
Yes.
All right, well, let's move along a little bit here because time is going. So do you think people should want their children to have a work ethic? And if so, how do the children learn about the value of work?
Well, we live in a culture where work is important. You're valued if you work in this culture. You're not necessarily valued if you inherit money. You're valued if you make money. But even beyond that, it's really about meaning. How does somebody have meaning in their lives if there isn't something that's important, whether it's restoring cars, or you're an artist, or you're a CPA, or you're a lawyer, that there needs to be some feeling that of being validated for what, in fact, you do. And I think the other thing is that's important too is how families who have a business then also want input about what it means to have a family business and what's needed. And in one situation, the oldest daughter, who was was in college, everyone thought she was really going to be very important, but her parents sat down with her and her aunt and uncle and her grandmother and basically said, if you want to work in this company, liberal arts is not okay. You need to make a major in engineering. And by the way, after that, we'd like you to get an advanced degree. So if this is something that you want, then this is what the company's going to need from you. So I think that's a whole nother way of looking at that issue of the work ethic, what's important, how much control parents have and how much they don't. Having meaning is really important. I remember working with a guy who was probably in his mid-40s, and he said, I've had toys all my life. I've always had the money to get what I really wanted, and then when I got it, it really didn't have meaning because it came from the family money. And I've just sort of gone from one hobby to another, and it's not fulfilling. What at 45, is this what I want to do with the rest of my life?
When I think about this stuff of work ethic, I think back again even to some of my own experiences. When I was a little kid, we used to have fruit trees in the backyard, lemons and limes and so forth, more than we could ever eat. And so Mom used to hand me a bag and says, here, go off and sell these to the neighbors, and you can, I can't remember. I think it was 5 cents for a lemon and a dime for a lime or something like that. This is a long time ago. And so, obviously. So anyway, but it got us out and meeting people and offering in that way. And then I think, of course, there's the tradition of the lemonade stand. The kids, of course, quite often the parents pay more for the lemonade than the people who are buying it, and of course Girl Scout cookies and what have you. So there's all these different types of experiences that kids can have. Maybe sometimes again through their organizations like Scouts and so forth.
Which gives them a level of independence too. Yeah. It's not in the context of the family. In my own experience as a kid, I got my first job when I was 15 in a woman's apparel store, and I felt so independent. I had money I didn't have to ask my parents. I didn't have to negotiate with them. I had my own money. It was very powerful. It's very powerful to feel independent and like you can make your own way.
Oh yeah. So, and I worked in restaurants. I had a paper route when I went to school. which nowadays you can't because people have enormous paper routes and they have cars.
Cars, right.
So they're actually adults that usually are handling the paper routes anymore. And the newspapers are going out of business anyway. But worked in restaurants as a busboy and so forth. And then actually I worked selling. I had a brother-in-law who worked in the car business, so I had the opportunity of doing some selling in the business. Also did some puller brush and some Amway. So
yeah, I worked all the way, all the way through.
But the thing is that I did make money so that then I could buy things from my own efforts.
Right.
So I bought my own guitars and some other things, and that was
very
rewarding.
Powerful. Yeah, it's very powerful.
Okay. All right. Well, now, when do you tell your children about estate plans or net worth or that sort of stuff?
Well, that's a complicated question, and I'll start with a easy answer and then a more complicated one. It's important to look at where your children are in their lives. Are they making it on their own? Are they struggling? So, if you have kids who are in good shape, it's probably a good conversation. If they're not, you may want to wait because, wow, Mom and Dad said in 3 years I'm going to get this much money, so I don't really have to work. And I remember working with a family where I did a presentation, and I knew this guy, and he came up and we sat down and he said, we just sold the company, and I don't really think I want to talk to my kids about it. So that sounds great, whatever you want to do. So 10 years later, he calls me up and he says, well, I think it's time. So what I do is I interview everybody in the family, and so I call his son, and he said, so this is what I want to know. Why did he wait 10 years after he sold his company? Why didn't he give us any money before that? And I said, to him, this is a confidential conversation, but I'd really like to ask your dad to start our meeting with that. And so he sat down and he said, you guys were all young. You guys were all right out of college. I didn't know what you were going to do with your money. And he said, so we wanted to wait, until we could see how you worked out. And he said, you're all making your own way. So yeah, now we're going to start giving you money.
Yeah. Well, a concern for a parent is this entitlement sort of attitude, and I even see it, with my clients' families and so forth. And I saw, recently we had one that had a very large gift, and the next thing I know, the kids are coming back for more. Why? What's the deal?
Well, I also think that I worked with a family where there was a very substantial amount of money that went to the couple's siblings as well as the children. But one of their questions is, if I give this money, how can I ensure that they won't come back?
Yeah.
And I said to him, the only thing you can do is you can say, this is it.
Yeah.
This is it. And so, which means that when they come and try, that you say, and I think he even wrote everybody a letter. This is what this means. This is how you're going to get the money, and just want to make it very clear that this is it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there was a pattern, and you get these conflicts in a sense, because in some ways, in an estate planning way, especially for large families,
makes sense.
There are advantages in giving to kids and so forth earlier, but there is this thing of that they come to rely on it, and it's not really, I think, an emotionally healthy thing.
That's why the more that people can plan in terms of, well, we're not just giving them a big chunk of money now. What does that mean in the context as our lives as parents, and what does it mean in the context of their lives? So they really think through what, whether it makes sense. And I know sometimes taxes overshadow what's appropriate, what young people need. We really just want to pass this on. Well, what does this really mean for your kids? Well, it'll be okay because we don't want the tax guy to get this. So, I think that balance between, there's all that push to get the money out of your estate, to pass it down, without really thinking about what that means in terms of the future.
Okay. Well, Judy, we only have a couple minutes left. I think I'll ask you to maybe share one or two final thoughts, and then we can wrap this thing up.
So, my own thinking about young people making their own way, supporting them in education, supporting them in them getting their own jobs. If in fact that's what you want. Now, there are very many wealthy families who pass generations to generations of money when they're quite young. Often they have role models of parents who have been really, done wonderful things even though they've had the wealth. But I think the most important thing is to really think through the whole process. What does it really mean? If you start giving your children money because they're running out of money each month, what happens once you begin that process? So being thoughtful about it, what does this mean for our relationship? Because in the end, that's what happens, is that it impacts on the relationship.
Yeah. So